Welcome to the Small Business Sisterhood podcast. I'm your host, Pepper Makepeace, an online business strategist for female solopreneurs and side hustlers, and the founder of the Small Business Sisterhood, an online membership community serving small business owners in the first stages of business. Join me as I go behind the scenes with female entrepreneurs, revealing the struggles, strategies, and inspiring stories of these amazing women. If you're interested in connecting with like-minded women in a supportive online community that helps you stay focused, motivated, and accountable as you build your business, check us out at smallbusinesssisterhood.com. Today we're talking to Samantha Griffin. Samantha is an impassioned woman who unequivocally believes in the voices of women, especially Black women, and trusts their decisions regarding their bodies, their children, and their families. A certified birth doula and postpartum doula and certified childbirth educator, Samantha came to the realization that as one woman, she could only support one woman at any given time. With strengths in leadership, education, and organization, Samantha multiplied her efforts by founding DC Metro Maternity, a boutique parenting support agency. She brought on a team of other passionate female certified doulas of color, and together they have been supporting Black families in the DC, suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia areas since 2018. Well, thank you, Samantha, for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you and hearing more about you and your business.
Thank you for having me, Pepper. I'm excited to be here.
So tell everybody a little bit about you and your business.
Yes. So I am a doula. I support people during pregnancy, at their birth, and during the postpartum period when their babies are very young. And my business is based in the DC area. So DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I've been a doula for this year makes 8 years, and I've been in business for myself for about 4 years now.
Okay. So what made you transition from your work before as a doula to opening your own business?
That's an excellent question. I will give you the short-ish version. When I first began working as a doula, it was definitely out of passion. And I know that you and I have talked about, one of, or several of the reasons that women tend to start businesses. And for me, it was because I was doing something that I loved on the side, sort of. And I was initially a doula as a volunteer. I work mostly with women of color and was working with people in very vulnerable situations, not a lot of income, if any, maybe some challenging family dynamics and volunteering to support them. But what I realized is that going to people's labors in the middle of the night or whenever the baby comes while working a full-time job is really hard.
I imagine that would be challenging.
Yeah, it doesn't work out so well, Pepper. And so that combined with several other things that were happening in my life, it made me want to leave the job that I was working at in nonprofits. I got tired of being a program manager and kind of moving things around on spreadsheets and sitting behind a desk on the phone, and really wanted to lean into actually working with people directly. And so when I did that, I did something that I would not recommend new entrepreneurs do. I quit my job with some savings, but without a plan, and kind of blew up my life and sat in my apartment and ate a lot of Popeyes for a little bit and watched Murder, She Wrote. Because Angela Lansbury is very comforting.
Yes, she is.
She really is. Great voice. The problem always gets solved. And then at some point, I met doulas who were making a living at this. And they said, oh, well, if you love this work and you want actual clients, then you have to go find clients. You can't just wait for them to find you in your apartment.
I wish it worked that way, right?
I we all wish that our businesses worked that way, but they don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, that got me started on the idea of actually needing to market. And of course, when you're marketing and you're taking money, then you need a business bank account. And when you need a business bank account, then it's best to get an LLC. And so then a business was born. Yeah, that's pretty much how it happened. It was, the business part was a little bit accidental, but I'm really thankful for it.
Was it scary at all, kind of like taking your passion and turning it into a business, or did it just kind of, sometimes I see it and it's like it almost just kind of happens like naturally, organically, and it's like the business just kind of forms itself almost. But if you think of, like, I know a lot of people that have this passion and they want to start a business, but it's really intimidating and it's really overwhelming, and it's hard to kind of get past that feeling and in the work. So how was it for you? What was your experience?
It was incredibly intimidating. Fortunately, though, in many ways it was organic. I'm remembering it really did just happen. I mean, when I was doing doula work as a volunteer, then for me, it was always hard because I was using my vacation days to like go and support people. But when you get to be like well rested, all you have to do is work with this one person. And I remember getting like a part-time job. And I also, in order to like stretch my savings a bit, once I realized like what this was actually going to look like, I moved back in with family. Mm-hmm. So there were things that were challenging about it and some sacrifices to make, but there was a lot of flow also. And that sounds so woo, but I'm a doula. So people usually, I think people are often surprised by like how little woo. But for me, like really getting the business itself started, there was a lot of flow in it. It just seemed like the right thing. So I was scared the entire time, but every time I took a little step, there was like a response to it. And so I remember when I first learned what Canva was and made a graphic with like a headshot that I had gotten that a friend shot for me and like a cute little font and like announced that I was a doula and taking clients. So many people shared it and the response was so affirming. And a friend of a friend became my first paid client. And yeah, people just kept coming. And even now, sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll still be a doula because this lady just called me. And I feel really fortunate that like whenever I do some work to put my work out there, there tends to be a positive response.
That's very helpful. That can help with a lot of the mental stuff that goes on with building a business, especially early on. That affirmation from the outside world is very helpful.
It is. And I will admit that while I want to be one of those people that's completely internally motivated, that's not who I am. I'm definitely a relationships person. And so like accountability to other people and a positive response to other people, it really keeps me going in a lot of ways. And I think that probably that was one of the biggest helps at the very start of my business.
Well, and especially since your business is passion motivated and you're wanting to help these women, like that kind of reassurance almost that you are helping and it's a very positive thing for them. I mean, obviously that helps drive that passion and therefore helps build the business.
Yes. Thank goodness.
So when you first started your business, were you as niche down as you are now? I know you have a specific clientele that you work with right now. Is that kind of what you've always done, or how did you first start out with that?
That's a good question. So for the listeners, the niche that I particularly serve in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia, we call it the DMV. So in the DMV area, I tend to work with families of color, I think is a good broad vision. But most of my clients are Black women, 30 plus, I would say, which we know is like a different pregnancy than 25 or, 15. Right. And they tend to have jobs and be very career focused and not have made becoming a mother their first priority in adulthood. They're kind of coming to it now. And that's a very particular group of people. And definitely some other people come in and really enjoy working with myself and the team of doulas that I have. But initially, I was not quite as niche down as I am now. I kind of found who I vibed with the most and who I enjoyed working with. And that became, I guess, what the entrepreneur world calls my ideal client avatar. But I always knew, and I think this comes back to the passion base of the business for me, that I did want to work with Black women because initially I got started in doula work because I had learned about some of the challenges that people have in pregnancy when they have like a particularly under-resourced background, so like women in prisons at the time, and now it's illegal, but I think it does still happen in some places. We're giving birth while like shackled, actually. And that sounds horrifying to me. Or very young parents in their teens, just the lack of resources that they have. I met a few. And so my desire to do doula work grew out of that. And also learning about the maternal mortality rates in the U.S. for Black women. The U.S. has maternal mortality rates for everyone that are like developing countries and not, the richest nation in the world. And it's particularly bad for African American women and Native American women here. And wanting to help and support people through this really vulnerable time is what I wanted to do even before it was a business. And so then when I was running a business, it just made sense to work with the people that had gotten me into this work. And then, of course, when you are charging for things, you find that you need to work with people who can afford to pay you so you can keep your lights on.
Right.
And also, like I said, I really just found the people that I gravitated towards who remind me of like my friends and people I went to college with and my colleagues. So my niche has grown out of, again, something very organic for me.
Yeah. When you kind of landed with your current niche, did it feel like the marketing kind of became easier a little bit because you were more specific about who you were talking to, or what was that experience like?
Yes, so much yes. Because, so my recollection of first starting a business is I wanted to be able to help everybody. And I never wanted to feel like I was turning someone off or turning a client away, both because I wanted to help people and also because, I wanted the money to frank,
survive.
to survive, right? And so that this business could be like, quote unquote, real.
Yeah.
But what I have learned both from watching other people and in my own experience is when you're trying to talk to everybody, you end up talking to no one.
Yeah.
Because like no one is like, oh, that's for me. She is my person that will solve my problem. And so now that I have this particular subset of people, I know, like in my case, I know how they approach pregnancy. They tend to have achieved a lot and they kind of want pregnancy to work the same way. Like you do X, Y, Z, and then in the end, you get a happy, healthy baby and a birth experience that looks like this and the heavens smile upon you. And they are a bit frustrated when things don't go that way, or it makes them a little bit anxious, or there are various problems that I know that the people that I want to be working with have that are not the problems of everyone who is pregnant or has a new baby. And so it becomes so much easier to market when you know what issues it is that you solve really well.
I love that. And they say that's true. And I love that you're an example of how that is actually effective. And it's true. Everybody hearing this, it's true.
It's true. I promise. And I know that I didn't believe it. I know that I didn't believe it. I So in the area where I live, working with, even if I solely wanted to work with Black women or more broadly families of color, I know statistically from like the census and, our earnings here that these families have the ability to afford like personal services. Like, so I knew that intellectually, but still there was so much fear. Like, what if there aren't enough people? But a thing that I did when I did my business plan was look at the number of babies that I think at first I went just by like race and age, the people that I thought I wanted to work with. So like Black women 30 plus is I think how the census categorized it. And it was like, I think even when I added some income parameters, it was like 9,000 babies are born every year in this area. Pepper, I do not want to attend births in a year.
You don't want to do them all, huh?
No way. And so I think that sometimes we get really nervous about like limiting who we're working with, it starts in marketing. So that's where it starts. Right. The nerves start because, of course, if someone comes to the website and they really connect with me, I'm going to work with them. And that remains the case regardless of my niche. But even in the marketing, I think we can get so nervous that there won't be enough. I think that that's a really common, scarcity mindset for new entrepreneurs. But I promise y'all, it gets easier if you're just talking to one person or two people and not 50,000.
Right. Yeah. Cause technically a doula business, it's a woman that's pregnant, like that could be so many different things, so many different age groups. They're so broad, right?
Yes.
And to go down to Black women who want to give birth in the hospital, right? Is that kind of your, and it's such an interesting mind trip or something that happens. Like when you want to go so specific and talk to those people, but it feels so uncomfortable because you don't want to leave other people out. But you've said to me in a previous conversation that people that don't fall into those parameters still can resonate with the things that you're saying. And that happens, I think, that if we can be specific in how we talk about things, then it can resonate on a level that is so much deeper than if we're talking to just this broad, random, anybody that's pregnant kind of group, right?
Yes, it's true, Pepper. And I love that you bring this up. And thank you for reminding me, because so what happened when I decided first I want to work with Black women, and then out of necessity, I want to work with Black women who can afford to actually pay for this service and birthing in the hospital. That was the start of it. And so then I find, okay, they do tend to be over 30, as I think I mentioned a couple minutes ago. They have a certain income. They tend to have big jobs, where I call them big brain jobs, where they think all day. Then they're overthinkers, right? When it comes to pregnancy. And what that often means is that there are other people who have big brain jobs where they overthink their pregnancies. They've waited a bit to get pregnant, or they've been trying for a while before the baby comes. And so there's a certain kind of white woman who shares a lot of characteristics with this other sort of client that I've described that I work really well with. And we vibe so well. And they end up having amazing births and postpartum periods that I get to be a part of. And so I think that we assume that when we niche down in our marketing that we're eliminating everybody else, right. But it's not the case, because it's exactly what you said, that when you're talking about things in a certain way, then whoever thinks about them, whatever the problem is that your business solves, if you have a particular take on it and you're open about that take, then people know, okay, this person gets it. This person will get me. Because it's your podcast, I can say she will get me. We'll be on the same page. And because I know what problems I solve, then when that like 42-year-old white woman who's having her first kid and is a lawyer for someone very important walks in the door, I know, oh, I'm going to get you too. And we can talk on this deep level that's not even about the surface demographic stuff anymore. Right. It's about how she views, in my case, her family and her pregnancy and what it means to breastfeed when you know, like, you're also going to have to be on a couple of conference calls to like train somebody to do what you've been doing for 20 years. You know, it's a very particular experience that we can connect on. And I know that it has worked for doula work, and I believe that it would work for a lot of entrepreneurs to down.
I love that. And I love that you've had so much success with it. So a couple of years ago, you went from being kind of on your own to opening an agency, correct?
Yes, that was scary.
I was going to ask, was that like no big deal, or like that sounds sounds like it could be a big deal. I don't know.
It felt like a very big deal. It was absolutely terrifying. So when people, talk to new business owners, we talk to them about marketing, and we talk to them about systems and automating, especially, if we're talking about like businesses that have some online component. So much of what we discuss is like making it scalable.
Right.
And for me, with work that up until, 2020 had always been in person and very intimate, the only way to scale was to sort of duplicate myself and work with other people. And so out of that came an agency, and it really was very simple, again, an organic and out of somewhat necessity for the business, because if I wanted to both go to birth as a labor doula and support people like in the middle of the night when they're trying to figure out how to make their baby stop crying, and do postpartum doula work, sometimes they're going to overlap and be in a little bit of conflict. And so it helped to have someone else working with me. And in order to have her working with me, it's like, oh, we need some kind of legal relationship. And so she became an independent contractor. And suddenly I ran an agency. It was a little more intentional than I'm making it sound, because I also went from branding that was in my name to like based on the location that I'm in. So now the business is DC Metro Maternity, because there is more than just me in it. But when I did that, it was right and it made sense. But it was also scary because I suddenly felt responsible for the work of someone else, and also like getting her opportunities. And so I think that one of the things that I've been hearing a lot recently is that in part, women in particular have a hard time making more money as entrepreneurs because we don't build teams and we don't grow. And I think that some of that is, and this is a generalization, but many of us see ourselves as caretakers, and we are very emotionally connected to our business, which I think is a positive. I also think it can make us a little more risk averse. And I just remember feeling responsible for someone else's income, which was not the case, because that's not what the independent contractor relationship is. And that's not what she thought either. It was nerve-wracking. It was at first.
Were there other components to, so when I think about like hiring team members, like I have a particular vision, obviously, for my business and, core values that are important to me that are reflected in the work that I do. And hiring team members that align with those things, it's an important thing. And I did you have issues with that with any of the people that you tried, or like, did you have specific conversations with them and say, this is what we're about? Like, are you on board with this? Like, talk to me about your experience with that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And for me, this is in some ways still an area of growth. So when it comes to businesses that are very, I think, passion based, people often don't get into doula work to make a lot of money at it. And so, most of us.
The millionaire doula is not a thing.
I'm not going to say there are none of us, but there aren't very.
It's not a movement that's happening.
Not yet. Who knows? It's a brave new world lately.
That's true.
And honestly, I would not hate if I became one. Just,
no, not.
Who's listening.
It's just not your focus. Like, I think doula is it's just not
first
priority. Yeah.
And like with the business structure, like I would actually love for my business to make 7 figures, to be honest. But and that 7 figures would be split between 8 of us right now. Yeah. So, my ambitions, at least at the moment, are not quite as big as they could be, I guess. But when I'm bringing people in, treating it like a business, I think is the hard part for some of the doulas that I know that I think are very passionate and have solid core values that are similar in a lot of ways. If people look at my website, the About page really lists some of the values that I have around social justice and around health inequities and around what I believe birth and parenting should be like for everybody, regardless of our identities. And finding doulas who vibe with that is not hard. I think maybe in other industries, like finding people who share some of those core values could be hard. But for me, what has been surprising is finding people who want to treat this as the same priority that you would give any other profession. So like showing up on time and being really excellent at the work and making sure that our clients feel a certain way when they work with us, that can be challenging. And in part, I believe it's because people just care so much about this work that they just want to do as much of it as possible, regardless of what else is going on in their lives. And I know that for a lot of us as entrepreneurs, like carving out the time to work on your business when you are your own boss is hard. Yeah. The same I've seen is true for some of the independent contractors that I've had. No one who's currently on the team, if you all are listening to this, you're wonderful. We're good. Everything is lovely. In part, though, what has been on my plate as the owner of the business is to really communicate, like, this is how things go. This is how we work. Does that work for you? And getting comfortable with what I find to be uncomfortable conversations sometimes. Right. It's been an area of growth.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And even just hiring, like for example, the podcast, I edited my own podcast for the first, I don't know how many episodes, because I'm such a control freak sometimes. And I have a particular sense of what I want and, a level of quality that I feel is necessary. And it took me a really long time to find, luckily, this friend that I know that used to do video editing now does podcasts only, and she's amazing. So I was like, oh, thank God, like I can trust her. And I totally trust everything about her. Podcastology, if you all need a podcast editor. But it took me a long time to find somebody that I felt like, okay, it's just a podcast. I can't imagine doing it with like somebody's birth, right? Like that's a bigger deal in my mind. But, even that small thing of just making sure that it sounds like me and it doesn't, it kind of aligns with my vibe and not, so I can relate to that on a certain level. Obviously it's not the same, but.
Well, in ways it's similar because like what I hear you saying, your podcast is your voice. Yeah. Like very regularly put your voice out there in the world, and you're interviewing other women who run small businesses and really trying to create something to serve people, and it's your name on this thing.
Yeah. And I was so conscious about, like, I want the other business to sound good. I want them to, have, because it's marketing for them too. And like, I had all these emotions tied up in every episode. It was like,
so many feelings. I think hiring is really hard.
Yeah.
Hiring, especially when you do have like a particular mission. I mean, I see your podcast as having a particular mission and a vision, and I think you're pretty niched as well. And so like you're talking to certain people, and it can sometimes be hard to let other people into your business. And I've found myself swinging from one end of the pendulum to the other. Either I have been holding things so closely that I don't let anyone in and I don't get the help that I need. Or if I try to get help and I'm not sure that it's quite the right help, then I have a really hard time. Well, less so lately, but in the past, I have had a really hard time communicating the standard. Instead, I just want to like shut them out and shut the doors, and I'll just go back to doing it myself.
Right. Yeah, I've been there. Like that why is that conversation so awkward? Like,
why is it awkward? It's really just like, hey, could you proofread email like that? That doesn't mean I think she's a bad person.
Right.
In my head, it's so much harsher and more aggressive. And I can't imagine you being an aggressive person at all. I'm sure that anytime you've needed to communicate with someone about like podcast editing, or I don't know, if you were going to hire an assistant or anything, I think often those of us who worry quite a bit about conflict are not particularly confrontational or aggressive. We're probably fine.
Such a learning curve, though, isn't it? Like every step of the way, there's a learning curve in some way or another.
It really is. I think that learning curve has been challenging for me. Thankfully, though, in some ways, for the sake of growth, like the work that I do just requires, if I want to be able to do it, for like the number of people that I do want to impact, I just have to keep learning.
Right.
On this particular front, I just have to keep going. So,
yeah, absolutely. So when you think back to like when you first started, I know you said you made a lot of sacrifices and you had to, obviously there's a learning curve. It's really steep in the beginning. Can you think of anything in particular that was particularly challenging or surprising that you might have some advice around for people that are just starting out?
I think a thing that surprised me initially, everything that we just talked about with forming an agency, if you had asked me at the start, I would have told you, no way, there's no decide. So that was a surprise. But another thing that surprised me was that setting up systems and structure actually allowed me to be more free. Many ways. I think that I was resistant to the idea of like working on my business. I mean, I can't schedule people's births in most instances, but like the marketing portions of things, like the sort of boring stuff, like paying invoices and all of that, I was resistant for years to like having some kind of schedule for myself. And I would just work when I got inspired and blog when I got inspired and like pay the bills when I got an email that it was due. A thing that surprised me is like, I'm not one of those early birds with like a 5-hour morning routine or whatever, but I make a point to sit down at my computer by 10 o'clock most days and like work. And I make a little to-do list at the end of every work day for the next work day. And it's such a simple structure, but it has been so helpful. And if you had asked me several years ago if I would enjoy such a thing, I would say no. And I wish that I had started doing that from the beginning.
Mm. What do you think it like freed up? Like for me, having some structure, it frees up parts of my brain so then I could be more creative. It frees up, I don't know, the worry part of my brain sometimes too, because like there's those moments where you're thinking, oh, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. Yes. I can't forget that. And all of those things that you can then maybe put on a list and plunk in your calendar somewhere. Like tell me more about like how it felt more free to you.
Yes. So I agree with everything you just said. So I've described a lot of my clients to you, and I share some things in common with them, and can definitely overthink. And like, I really resonate with what you said about like the worrying part of your brain. Mm. If there is a spot on my calendar, like it's evolved a bit. And so now my workday tends to start at 10. I take breaks throughout the day because I do work for myself and I can do what I damn well please. So let's not go too far. But I also try to cut my day off by around 6, unless I do feel very inspired or someone's having a baby. And then like there are little slots in my calendar where, okay, on this day of the week from like 10 to 12 is when I write for the business and I do blogs. And because of that, like now, if I get an idea, instead of having to stop whatever I'm doing, and now instead of worrying that I'm going to forget about it or like having to stop whatever I'm doing, I can just put it on a to-do list and know that I'm going to come back to it on Tuesday at 10. So now I get to not worry that I'm going to forget all the things. I tend to schedule calls in the afternoon. And so if we get a potential client coming in, I don't have to stop what I'm doing in the middle of breakfast or call her at 11 at night because that's when she realized that she was pregnant. Like, no, I'm going to call her tomorrow at 3 and it's going to be fine. And also because I now have a schedule, I have like chunks of my week where I intentionally have like free time in the middle of the workday. Mm. And so often I use that for like just thinking or, being creative or something like that. And it has really created a certain freedom. And it also gives me space for if I get off track on a given day. Like you and I are recording this on the day of the inauguration. And so,
preoccupied just a little bit.
Practice morning, but because I have a calendar and I had already made a to-do list last night for today, when I looked at my journal this morning, I was like, oh, okay, well, I can move this and I can move that and I can move that because I know that I'm going to like listen to everything that Kamala Harris says for the next 24 hours. Yeah. And it's fine. And so it gives me room to be creative and also to like make mistakes and not be the perfect productive robot that without the schedule, I feel like I have to be because I can't tell when I'm going to get anything done.
I love that. I love how, because I totally agree with you. And sometimes I get off track with that. And then I come back and remind myself, the structure is really helpful. And when I get off of it again, it's like a mess. So it's like, I don't know why I let myself ever get off of it, but then you come back and it's like, right, this works so much better.
Yes.
Remember.
I know I get off of it because I have some sense that like, oh, well, this will be better. Like, you don't need to be tied down, man. Okay, girl. Like, at the end of the day, we are all still infants on some like core deep in the back of our brain level. And it really helps if someone just makes sure that we eat every few hours and make sure that we're clean and make sure that we are loved and cared for and whatever is coming next in our life is kind of predictable instead of like chaotic and we don't know what's coming and that gets very scary. And so like, sometimes I try to think that I'm above it. No, I am not. Like, the only difference between us as adults and infants, I mean, there are many differences, but on this level, like, we are responsible for doing all of that for ourselves. Like, we are just at an age where we have to be our own caregivers. And when I think about it as like taking care of myself, then I'm more likely to stay somewhere close to the structure that I know works instead of like going wild.
Well, and I think it's different as entrepreneurs, like when you go to a 9 to 5, there's set parameters within which you work and certain expectations that the company has for you as an employee. And we have to set some of that for ourselves as kind of our own employees of our own businesses.
Yeah.
And, some of it's not unreasonable, right?
Right. It is reasonable, Pepper, for me to do work on my business most work days. And I know that there were definitely times, less so, I would say, within the last year, maybe year and a half, I've felt really productive. And most of the time I'm, focused and structured as I need to be. But when I first started, I mean, like I said, I was sitting in my apartment eating a lot of fast food fried chicken and sort of, I think because I had really wanted to get out of the 9 to 5 world, I resented, feeling. I resented the idea of like still having to get up and take a shower and put on clothes. But like, just like it's reasonable for your employer to expect that you actually get some tasks done that are related to your job function.
Right.
If we want our businesses to grow, and I cannot imagine who would listen to a podcast about small businesses that didn't want their business to grow. Right. We have to show up for ourselves and take care of ourselves and our businesses. Like, it's like you said, it's not unreasonable.
Absolutely. Well, it has been so much fun talking to you. And I feel like I've learned so much and have been reminded of so many good things just in this short conversation. I love you. I love your business. And it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Pepper. I think that you have created a really lovely space. And the more episodes I listen to, the more I appreciate. And I also wish that when I was, sitting around figuring out what on earth to do with myself, that I had known that podcasts like this exist. I think that it's super helpful, especially when you're starting out.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And that's my only hope, is that it helps somebody out there to feel a little less alone and a little more like they've got this and we can figure this out. We're smart. We can all do this.
Yes. And for anyone who's listening, like everything that I've figured out, I promise you I did not used to know. By far. So yeah,
it's a process.
Just one step at a time. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you, Pepper. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Samantha, for talking with us today. You can find out more information about Samantha and the link to her website in the show notes for this episode at smallbusinesssisterhood.com/33. I hope you found this episode useful and inspiring. If you did, please pop over to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.